The snow came down like ashes from a dying sky. The Wyoming plains stretched endless and white, swallowing sound and color until even the horizon vanished. The wagon tracks had long disappeared under the storm, and Emma Calloway could barely see her own hands red and raw, tied cruelly behind her back. Her stepbrother Clayton had done this. She could still hear his voice echoing in the blizzard. "You slowed us down. Emma, you're not worth the food you eat." Then the snap of his reins, the creak of the wagon wheels fading away until she was alone with the wind. Her breath came in ragged clouds. She tried to shout, but her voice broke on the cold. The snow clung to her eyelashes, the world turning silver and gray. Every few steps she stumbled, her skirts heavy with frost. She'd never been one for praying, not since her mother died, but as the wind tore at her face, she found herself whispering, "Please, Lord, just let it end quick." The cold wasn't a feeling anymore. It was a thief, stealing her breath, her heartbeat, her hope. When her knees finally gave way, she fell face first into the snow and didn't rise. Her body began to tremble violently, and she thought, with distant calm, that she might simply disappear there, just another ghost among the winter hills. Then, OOOFBEATS. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks again. But the sound grew clearer, slow, steady, deliberate. She turned her head weakly, blinking through the blur. A horse emerged from the curtain of snow, its coat glistening like smoke. The man upon it was wrapped in furs and leather, his long dark hair dusted with frost, his face set in quiet strength. He swung down in one smooth motion, crouching beside her. His eyes, dark, steady, unreadable, met hers. She tried to speak, but her lips were blue, her voice gone. The man said nothing. He untied her wrist with swift precision, his gloved hand surprisingly gentle. When the rope fell away, she gasped from the pain of returning blood. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, wrapping his heavy fur around her trembling body. The warmth was so sudden it hurt Dot as he carried her toward his horse. She tried to ask who he was, but the words wouldn't come. The storm howled around them, filling the air with ice and fury. She heard the soft jingle of his horse's tack, the deep creak of leather, and the steady rhythm of his breathing as he settled her before him in the saddle. Through half-lidded eyes, she watched the white world slide past the twisted branches, the faint trail of hoofprints behind them. His arms held her securely, his chest a wall of heat against her back. She wanted to fight the darkness closing in, to thank him, to ask why he'd helped a stranger. But her body gave up the battle. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was the curve of his jaw, the sharp line of his profile against the snow, and the strange mark of red paint that streaked his cheekbone. An Apache, she thought vaguely. They said they'd kill me if I ever met one. But death had already been at her door, and this man had driven it away. When she finally stirred again, it was to the crackle of a fire. The air smelled of smoke, pine, and something wild. She lay on a bed of furs, wrapped tightly from chin to toe, her body aching but alive. Snow hissed at the mouth of a nearby cave, where the wind could no longer reach her. The Apache sat by the fire, his back straight, his hands working a piece of wood with a knife that gleamed in the light. He glanced at her once, his eyes calm but sharp, then returned to his carving. Emma's lips trembled as she tried to speak. "Why? Why did you save me?" For a long moment, the only answer was the fire's crackle. Then, in a voice low and steady as distant thunder, he said, "Because no one should die cold." His words settled deep inside her like the warmth of the fire itself. She didn't yet know his name, nor the reason behind the sorrow in his eyes. But as the blizzard raged outside, Emma Calloway realized she'd been given a second chance, and that the man who had found her in the storm was not her end. He was her beginning. When Emma awoke again, the storm had quieted to a whisper. The wind still moaned beyond the cave walls, but inside there was peace, fragile and glowing, born of the small fire that burned in the center. Shadows danced across the stone, painting the walls with the steady rhythm of flame. She lay wrapped in thick buffalo hides, her hair damp from melted snow. Her lips were cracked, her throat dry as bone. For a moment, she wondered if she had truly died and this was some strange afterlife, until the sharp smell of smoke and the steady scraping of a knife pulled her back to earth. He was there. The Apache. He sat near the fire, bare-chested beneath his fur cloak, muscles coiled in quiet strength. His skin was bronze, marked with faint scars and painted lines faded by time and wind. His hair fell past his shoulders, black as midnight, and his eyes, those dark, unflinching eyes, lifted to meet hers the instant she stirred. She froze. Her first thought was fear, the kind her stepbrother and the men in town had bred into her. Savages, they'd called his kind. Murderers, thieves, heathens. But there was nothing savage in the way he looked at her, only the calm of someone who'd seen too much and chosen silence over cruelty. He reached beside him, picked up a wooden bowl and held it out. "Drink," he said simply. His voice was deep, accented, but clear. Her hand shook as she accepted the bowl. Warm broth touched her lips, and the salt stung her dry throat. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear, but from the shocking comfort of it. When she could finally speak, her voice came in a rasp. "You saved me." He gave a slow nod, his gaze never leaving the fire. "The snow kills without hate. It takes what it can. Then why help me?" she asked, whisper soft. This time he looked at her fully, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Because no one should die cold and alone." His answer was so plain, so honest, that it stilled her completely. For a while, neither spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the silence between them. Emma studied him quietly, the curve of his jaw, the patient stillness of his movements. He was unlike any man she'd ever known. There was no arrogance, no hunger for power or praise. He didn't look at her as something broken or helpless. He looked at her as though she were simply alive. After some time, he rose and stepped outside the cave, disappearing into the gray light. She heard the crunch of snow, the jingle of his horse's reins. When he returned, he carried branches in one arm and a fresh hair slung over his shoulder. He set to work skinning it, hands sure and practiced. Emma wanted to speak, to thank him again, to understand who he was, but she was too weak. Instead, she watched the firelight flicker on his face as he worked, the golden glow softening the hard planes of his expression. When the smell of roasting meat filled the air, her stomach growled. He noticed. Without a word, he tore off a piece and handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it. The meat was hot, tender, smoky. The first bite burned her tongue and made her eyes water, but she didn't care. She ate slowly, almost reverently, like someone who'd forgotten what life tasted like. He watched her for a long moment, then said, "Your name?" "Emma," she murmured. "Emma Calloway." He inclined his head slightly. Taza. The name settled in her mind like a secret. Outside, the wind began to howl again, but softer, now more distant. She drew the hides tighter around herself, her eyes growing heavy. Through the haze of warmth and exhaustion, she heard the sound of his voice, a low hum, an old melody in a language she didn't know. It wasn't harsh or strange. It was soft, sad, beautiful. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered drowsily, "That song? What does it mean?" Taza's answer came quiet and low. "It is for those who live when they were meant to die." Her breath caught. She wanted to ask more, but her eyelids were too heavy. The fire crackled, and the melody faded into the hush of the cave. For the first time in years, Emma Calloway slept without fear, wrapped not just in furs, but in the unspoken promise of a man she barely knew, and somewhere deep within her weary heart, she felt the first warmth of something she had long forgotten: hope. By the time the second dawn broke over the canyon, Emma could sit up on her own. Her fingers, once white and lifeless, now glowed pink from the blood that had returned. The cave still smelled of smoke and pine, and the fire Taza had built burned steady as a heartbeat. She watched him move quietly through the small space, each motion deliberate, balanced, silent. He was sharpening a knife against a flat stone, and the soft rasp filled the air. "Your fever is gone," he said without looking up. She blinked, startled. "You stayed up all night?" Taza shrugged lightly. "You talked in your sleep. Called for someone named Mother." Her chest tightened. "She died when I was 14. Winter took her too." He said nothing for a while, just fed another stick to the fire. The flames crackled and threw light across his face. "Winter takes the weak," he said finally, "but it makes the strong harder." Emma studied him, his quiet confidence, his calm voice, his unshakable stillness. There was a peace about him that she couldn't name, but also a sorrow buried deep, like ice beneath a river. He handed her a steaming cup made from hollowed wood. "Drink this." She sniffed it. The liquid was bitter, earthy. "What is it?" "Medicine. Willow bark, sage, and heartleaf. It will keep your blood warm." She obeyed, grimacing at the taste but drinking every drop. Her throat burned, then tingled. Warmth bloomed slowly through her chest, easing the ache that had taken root there since the night she was abandoned. When she handed back the cup, she caught sight of her wrists bruised and raw from the rope her stepbrother had used. Taza noticed too. He reached into a small leather pouch and took out a smooth gray paste, which he spread gently over the welts. His touch was steady, impersonal, yet every brush of his fingers sent heat through her skin. "Why do you live alone?" she asked softly. He paused. "Because my people do not want me." She frowned. "But why?" He looked away, eyes fixed on the fire. "Because I am not one thing. My mother was Apache. My father was a soldier. Both worlds see me as less." Emma's heart clenched. She knew what it meant to be unwanted, to be seen as something broken. For a long time, they said nothing. The only sound was the fire and the soft sigh of wind brushing the cave mouth. At last, she whispered, "Then maybe you and I are alike." He turned his head, curiosity flickering in his gaze. "You? My father died owing money. My stepbrother sold our home. Then he sold me." Her voice cracked. "Saw it I was a burden. Not worth saving." The silence that followed was heavier than before. Taza's jaw tightened, and his eyes darkened not with pity, but with quiet anger. "You are worth saving," he said simply. The words struck her harder than any slap ever could. No one had ever said them, not once. She turned away, pretending to study the cave wall, but her eyes filled with tears. He rose then, moving toward the entrance where the light spilled in soft and pale. Outside, the world glistened under a blanket of new snow. "The storm is ending," he said. "When the sun comes, we leave this place." "Leave? Go where?" "South. To the rivers. You cannot survive here. You need food, shelter, life." She hesitated. "And you?" "I will see you safe." His voice was quiet but firm, like a vow carved in stone. Emma pressed the fur closer to her shoulders. "Why would you do that for me?" He met her eyes across the fire, his expression unreadable. "Because when I found you, I remembered my mother. She was left in the cold once too. No one came for her." Her breath caught. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. "Do not be sorry. Be strong." Then he added softly, almost to himself, "No one should die cold." Those words lingered in her heart long after he moved to tend his horse outside. She watched the firelight play against the stone and thought of what he'd said. He had no reason to save her. Yet he had. He owed her nothing. Yet he had given her everything: warmth, food, safety. And as the snow slowly melted beneath the rising sun, Emma Calloway knew that she would follow this man anywhere. Not because she owed him her life, but because he had given her back her soul. The first rays of sunlight cut through the cave mouth, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Emma Calloway blinked against the brightness, feeling the ache of her muscles and the warmth of the buffalo furs. Taza had already saddled his horse, a sleek black stallion whose breath curled in the cold morning air. Beside him, a smaller mare pawed at the ground, waiting patiently. "You ready?" he asked, his voice calm as ever. She swallowed and nodded, unsure if she was ready for the world outside, the storm behind them, and the journey ahead. But she trusted him. Somehow, she already trusted him more than anyone she had ever known. He helped her mount the smaller horse, adjusting the blankets around her legs. "Hold on tight," he said. The cold wind bit at her face as they set out, carving a trail through deep snow and hidden ice. The plains stretched vast and empty, broken only by the jagged silhouettes of distant cliffs. Every gust carried a reminder of the night she had nearly died, but this time the danger was softened by Taza's presence, his steady hands. His eyes scanning the horizon, alert to every threat. The journey south was harsh. Nights were bitter, even with their furs and fire. They camped in hollowed-out rock ledges or behind fallen trees, wherever the wind offered a slight reprieve. Taza built fires from gathered wood and bark, teaching her how to keep the flames alive even when snow threatened to smother them. "You must never stand still too long in the cold," he instructed one evening, kneeling beside her as she shivered beside the fire. "Movement keeps blood in your hands and feet. But the fire will save your soul." He handed her a cup of steaming broth. She sipped slowly, the warmth spreading through her body like liquid gold. Every bite, every swallow was a reminder of how close she had come to dying and how far she had been brought back. Days passed in a rhythm of travel, fire, and silence. Along the way, Taza taught her how to find tracks in the snow, how to tell which animals were safe to follow, which were dangerous. He showed her how to gather roots and edible plants, how to listen for the distant cry of a hawk or the rustle of coyotes. Every lesson was practical, but also intimate, shared in the quiet way of people learning to survive together. One afternoon, as the wind died and the sky turned to clear, brilliant blue, Emma watched Taza from her horse. He moved with a grace that seemed impossible for a man so large, his eyes scanning the horizon, every movement deliberate and careful. She felt a strange heat in her chest, a swelling awareness that she had never known. I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, not looking directly at him. Taza glanced at her, eyes steady. "You need not thank me. I did not save you for thanks." She swallowed, thinking of the night in the storm, of the snow that had threatened to swallow her whole, of the hands that had lifted her from certain death. "But I would have died," she whispered. "And yet you live," he said. His voice was calm, but his words carried a weight she could not ignore. "And so you must learn to live well." They traveled through valleys dusted with snow, across frozen streams that cracked beneath the horses' hooves, and through forests that whispered with the sound of unseen life. At night, they huddled close to the fire, Taza humming low melodies of his people. Sometimes she asked him the meaning of the songs, and sometimes she simply listened, letting the music wrap around her like the blankets he had draped over her shoulders. With each mile, Emma felt life returning to her body and spirit. The cold that had seemed so final now held no power. Every step south was a step away from death, but also a step towards something she did not yet understand, connection that went deeper than mere survival. As the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky to fire, Taza stopped the horses atop a ridge. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will reach the river. There, food and shelter will be easier to find. You will be warm and safe." Emma's lips curved into a tentative smile. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, she believed it. She had survived the storm, the cold, the betrayal of those who should have protected her. And with Taza at her side, guiding her, she knew that she would never feel that kind of fear again. The wind whispered around them. But for the first time, Emma felt the warmth of a promise that was more than just fire or blankets. It was the promise of life and the man who had given it back to her. The plains stretched endlessly, golden and brown where the snow had melted, but Emma's heart felt tight, weighed by memories she had tried to leave behind. They rode in silence, Taza leading the way through valleys and low ridges, the sun warm on their shoulders after weeks of cold and storm. Yet the freedom of the open land couldn't chase away the ghosts of her past. It happened one afternoon, in a small frontier town tucked along a frozen creek. Emma had spotted smoke curling from chimneys before Taza did, and curiosity drew her closer. From the distance, the street seemed empty, quiet. But as they neared the trading post, the sound of voices drifted to her ears. "White woman spotted near the canyon," one man said, his voice harsh. "Thought she ran off with a savage." Emma's stomach tightened. She froze. The words, harsh, accusing, full of contempt, sliced through her like a knife. She knew them too well. They were the same words her stepbrother had used when he left her to die in the snow. The ones he used to justify selling her, abandoning her. Taza noticed the change immediately. His horse shifted beneath him, ears forward, alert. "What is it?" he asked. She shook her head, afraid her voice would betray her. "They're talking about me," she whispered. "About the night? About what happened?" He said nothing for a moment, just studied her. Then his hand came up, brushing her shoulder in a gesture that was both comforting and commanding. "Do not fear their words. The wind cannot catch the truth." Emma wanted to believe him, but fear gnawed at her. Her stepbrother's face flashed before her eyes, the greed, the cruelty, the smile he wore as he left her in the storm. And now he would hear she was alive, traveling with an Apache. He would come. That night, the air was colder, the stars sharp and distant above them. Taza built a fire behind the cover of a rocky outcrop, feeding it with dry branches he had scavenged. Emma sat wrapped in furs, watching him work, every motion precise and calm. "I think he will come," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. Taza didn't look at her. "Then we will be ready." His tone was flat, but the weight behind it carried absolute certainty. "And you will not face him alone." She shivered, not from cold but from the memory of betrayal. I thought I was done for," she murmured. "I thought I would die in the snow, and no one would care." He knelt beside her, eyes finally meeting hers. "I cared. I pulled you from the storm, and I will not let anyone take you back to that." For hours they sat in the flickering firelight, the wind moaning around them like a distant chorus of lost souls. Emma's hands clutched the furs tighter, but this time it wasn't just for warmth, it was a shield, a comfort. She realized that no matter what her past held, she now had someone who would face it with her. Someone who would fight for her without hesitation. The night stretched on, and she finally spoke again. I never imagined anyone would care for me like this. Not after all I've lost." Taza's eyes softened, though the intensity in them never wavered. Caring is not a choice for those who see suffering and have the strength to act. I acted, and I will continue to act for as long as I breathe. The words settled deep inside her, mingling with the warmth of the fire, the beat of her own heart. and the unspoken promise that had saved her life in the first place, "You'll never be cold again." Outside, the shadows of the past stretched long over the land. But inside, beside Taza, Emma Calloway began to understand. That survival was no longer about fleeing from danger. It was about standing tall beside someone who would not let her fall. She pressed closer to the fire and felt it just for the first time that the storm might be behind her, but life, real life, was only beginning. They had traveled far from the snowbound plains, down through narrow canyons where the sun barely reached the frozen ground. The wind no longer bit at their faces, but the land was still harsh rocky paths, hidden ravines, and the ever-present danger of men who might seek her. Emma had begun to regain strength, though each step left her muscles sore, and her spirit carried the lingering ache of betrayal and fear. It was on the third day after leaving the frontier town that danger found them again. A sudden shout echoed across the ridge above them, followed by the crack of gunfire. Emma's heart leapt into her throat. "Taza!" she shouted. He reacted instantly, swinging his horse around, eyes sharp as flint. Bullets hissed past, striking rocks and kicking up dirt. Without hesitation, he maneuvered their horses down a narrow gorge, using the cliffs for cover. Emma clung to him, her heart hammering, the adrenaline mingling with the heat of fear. But fate was cruel. A shot struck Taza in the shoulder. He cried out, gripping the reins with one hand. His other pressed to the wound, blood darkening the fur lining of his cloak. The horse faltered, stumbling slightly, but he steadied it with an iron grip. "Hold on," he barked, his voice strained but commanding. Emma's mind spun. He was hurt, and yet he was still keeping them alive. When they finally found a secluded alcove to stop, Emma jumped down, panic making her limbs stiff. "We have to stop the bleeding," she cried, trembling. Tazia sank to one knee, gritting his teeth. I can manage," he said, but she shook her head, refusing to obey. "I won't let you die," she insisted, ripping the corner of her skirt to make a bandage. Her hands shook as she pressed the makeshift cloth to his shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding. Each touch, each movement, sent shockwaves through her chest. Fear, gratitude, something far more dangerous. Something she did not want to name. Taza's eyes softened despite the pain. "You are brave," he whispered. His voice was low, strained, but there was a tenderness in it she hadn't heard before. "Braver than I expected." Emma swallowed hard, feeling tears prick her eyes. "You saved me. You carried me through the storm, and now it's my turn." For a long moment, the two of them sat in silence, only the sound of the small fire Emma built, crackling and alive, and the distant wind echoing off the rocks. Taza's breathing was ragged, his face pale, but there was something in his eyes, trust, vulnerability, and an acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible above the wind. "I could have let you die that night in the snow," he confessed, voice trembling slightly. "But your eyes, they stopped me. I saw something there, something worth protecting. I did not expect to feel it, yet I did." Emma's breath caught. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "And now you have me," she said softly. "Safe, alive. You are not alone either, Taza." A faint, almost shy smile crossed his face despite the blood and exhaustion. I do not know what to say," he admitted, the weight of his confession heavy in the frozen air. "You don't have to say anything," Emma whispered. "Just let me stay here with you." He nodded, finally allowing himself to lean back slightly, trusting her as she adjusted the furs around him, keeping him warm. The moment was fragile, yet powerful, a bond formed not in words, but in shared survival. in the vulnerability of fear and the strength of compassion. That night, under the wide-open sky, firelight dancing on the rocky walls of their alcove, Emma realized something she had never felt before. She did not merely owe Taza her life. She owed him her trust. Her heart died, and in the quiet of the canyon, with the stars glittering above like scattered diamonds, she felt the first stirring of love, a seed planted in the harshest winter, now finding warmth in the shelter of his presence. After weeks of travel through canyons and snowmelt rivers, Taza and Emma finally found a small cabin tucked beside the Verd River. It was an abandoned trapper's hideout, weathered and worn, with logs blackened by old fires and a roof patched with whatever the forest had offered. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, warmth, and above all, safety, a place where they could finally rest. Emma slid down from her horse, stretching stiff muscles that had long been tense from travel and fear. The cabin smelled of damp wood and moss, a far cry from the firewood smoke she had grown accustomed to. But the thought of walls shielding her from the wind made her chest lift with relief. Taza immediately set to work. He inspected the cabin, closed gaps in the logs with mud and moss, and rebuilt a small hearth. His hands were steady, confident, and practiced, every motion deliberate. Emma watched, mesmerized. There was something about him, something that made even the simplest tasks feel like a ceremony, grounded in respect for the land and the life it offered. "You will need to learn how to fish," Taza said after he finished. His voice was calm, firm, carrying the weight of experience. "And to track animals. And to read the river." "I don't know if I can," Emma admitted, feeling small in the presence of a man who seemed to belong to every wilderness he touched. "You can," he said simply. "You must." The days that followed were filled with lessons. He showed her how to fashion a spear, how to catch fish in the shallow bends of the river, and how to collect firewood without alerting predators. Every night he built a fire, carefully tending it while she huddled close, soaking in both the heat and the quiet strength of his presence. One evening, as the sky bled orange and pink over the river, Emma watched him silently, mesmerized by the way the firelight danced on his dark skin. His eyes, calm and observant, caught hers for a brief moment. "You've changed," he said softly. She laughed faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I hope it's for the better." He nodded. "You've grown stronger, harder, but also more alive." She looked down, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. For the first time since she had been left in the storm, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Not in the cabins of her father's debts, not in the cruelty of her stepbrother, not even in the towns where whispers of betrayal and gossip hung thick like dust, but here, beside this river, in a cabin carved from the wilderness, with a man who had given her life back that night. She sat near the fire, furs wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Taza hummed a low melody, one that spoke of rivers, mountains, and the unending cycle of seasons. She listened, letting the notes fill her chest, imagining life beyond survival life, with laughter, with quiet mornings by the river, and evenings warmed by firelight. Finally, she dared to ask, her voice barely above the crackle of flames, "Taza, will I always be safe here?" He looked at her, his eyes steady, unwavering. "You will never be cold again, Emma, not in body, not in spirit. Not while I am here." The words settled around her like the softest blanket, a promise stronger than any wall, any fire, any shelter. She pressed the furs closer, feeling a tremor of something deeper stir in her chest. The next morning, they woke to the sun glinting off the river, the water rushing like liquid silver. Emma moved closer to Taza, brushing her fingers along his arm as he adjusted the hearth. A smile lifted his lips, faint, private, but full of something she recognized: warmth, connection, a promise unspoken yet understood. Here, in the heart of the wild, Emma realized that survival was no longer her only goal. There was more life, trust, and perhaps something even more precious, love. And as the river flowed endlessly beside them, Taza's presence was a constant, solid as the earth beneath their feet, a reminder that the storm was over, the cold behind her, and a new chapter of life had begun. Spring had softened the harsh edges of the canyon, melting snow into rushing streams and coaxing wildflowers from the rocky soil. The cabin by the Verde River was alive with warmth, the hearth crackling morning and night. Emma had grown stronger, her skin no longer bruised and her hands steady as she learned Taza's ways: fishing, tracking, preparing food, even reading the subtle signs of the wilderness. But peace, as she had learned, was always fragile. It came one afternoon, riding up the ridge like a shadow from the past. Emma spotted the familiar cruel face before Taza did. Clayton, her stepbrother, mounted on a black horse and accompanied by two men, all armed and sneering. Her chest tightened, fear clawing at her throat. "They found you," she whispered, clutching Taza's arm. He didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed, scanning the terrain. "Stay close," he said, voice calm but hard, like iron forged in fire. "Do not speak until I say—" Emma's hands trembled, but she obeyed, sinking into the shadow of the cabin's porch. Clayton rode closer, his eyes gleaming with greed and disbelief. "Emma, you coward! You ran off with that." He spat the word as if it were poison. "Savage! You will come back with me." Emma's blood ran cold. The memories of the blizzard, of being left tied in the snow, surged through her. "I will never go with you," she said, voice steady now, though her heart thundered. Taza stepped forward, placing himself squarely between her and Clayton. His stance was calm, but there was a tension in the air, a quiet power that made the men hesitate. "She belongs to no one but herself," Taza said, his voice low and commanding. Clayton laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound. "You think you can stop me? You're a savage. You'll die here." Taza's eyes hardened, and with a single motion, he shifted his weight, ready to act. Emma felt the electricity in the air, the way Taza's presence seemed to bend the very space around him. But before a fight could erupt, Emma stepped forward, fire in her eyes. "You left me to die in the snow," she said, voice ringing across the clearing. "You sold me, abandoned me, and thought I was nothing. Now I choose my own life, and that life is here with him." Clayton sneered but faltered. Emma's words, her strength, her courage, it shook him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The two men with him glanced at each other, unsure. Taza's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his knife, but he didn't strike. He trusted her words, trusted her courage. "Go," he said to Clayton. "Take your shame with you and leave this place." For a long moment, Clayton hesitated, his pride warring with the knowledge that he had no claim here. Finally, with a sneer that failed to hide fear, he spurred his horse and disappeared down the ridge. His companions followed without a word, leaving only the echo of their hoofs fading into the canyon. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her legs shook and she sank to the ground, overwhelmed. Taza knelt beside her, wrapping a steadying arm around her shoulders. "You were brave," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did not run. You stood your ground." She looked up at him, tears glinting in her eyes, and whispered, "I didn't stand alone." He nodded, eyes softening. "And you never will again. Not while I am here." The sun began to dip behind the cliffs, bathing the cabin and the river in gold. Emma felt the weight of the past lift slightly from her shoulders. The man who had abandoned her was gone, and the storm of betrayal had been faced, not by fleeing, but by standing tall with the one who had given her life back. In that moment, Beside Taza, Emma realized something essential. She had survived the blizzard, the fear and the cruelty of men who thought her weak. And now she was finally free, not just from the cold, but from the chains of her past, the promise Taza had made so long ago in the storm. Echoed in her mind, "You'll never be cold again." This time she understood it fully. Spring had fully arrived, painting the canyon walls with green and gold. The river ran clear and strong, singing over rocks and around fallen logs. Emma had settled into life at the cabin with Taza, the daily rhythm of survival fishing. Gathering wood, tending fires had become second nature. And with each passing day, she felt the old fear and loneliness loosen its grip. But one morning, a trader's wagon appeared along the narrow river trail. Its wheels creaked over stones, and the driver, a middle-aged man with a sunburned face, tipped his hat politely. Emma and Taza approached cautiously, and the man called out, "I hear tell there's a young woman out here, lost and alone. I can take you east, to towns with comfort, warmth, and safety beyond the wild," he said. Emma's chest tightened. The promise of a normal life tugged at her, the homes, the inns, the towns she had once known before betrayal had made them cruel and empty. She glanced at Taza. His dark eyes met hers, steady and calm, waiting silently for her decision. The offer was tempting. A life without danger, without constant struggle. But even as she considered it, her heart ached. The freedom of the plains, the rhythm of the river, the quiet strength of Taza, all of it had grown into her soul like roots into the earth. To leave it would mean abandoning everything she had come to know as life, as safety, as love. I could go back, she murmured, more to herself than to him. I could live among people who speak my language, who follow rules, who might think me safe. Taza said nothing at first, only watching her. Then, in his calm, measured voice, he said, "And what of the woman you have become here? What of the trust you have found? The life you have fought to earn?" Emma swallowed, feeling tears prick her eyes. I don't know," she admitted. "You have a choice," he continued. "But it is not easy. The path to what is familiar may seem safe, but it will not protect your heart. You know that." She nodded slowly, her thoughts turning inward. Memories of snow, of betrayal, of fear, and of survival rose like a tide. She remembered Taza lifting her from the storm, carrying her through ice and darkness. She remembered the nights by the fire, learning, laughing, surviving together. And most powerfully, she remembered the trust, the gentle strength that had anchored her through it all. Her gaze met his, steady, unwavering. She knew her answer before the words left her lips. "I cannot go back," she said softly. "Not now. Not ever. The world I once knew, it left me behind. But here, with you, I am alive." Taza's lips lifted in the faintest smile, the first fully gentle expression she had seen on him. "Then this is your choice," he said. "Your life, your path. I will walk it with you." Emma felt a surge of relief and warmth. She realized that the towns, the inns, the comfort she might have returned to, could never offer what she had found here. Safety was more than walls and warmth. It was trust, partnership, and the quiet certainty that someone would not let you fall. The trader waited, the wagon's creak filling the canyon. Emma turned to him, shaking her head. "Thank you, sir," she said politely, "but I am not going back." The man nodded, tipping his hat, and departed, leaving them in the embrace of the canyon and the river. Emma turned to Taza. "I choose this life with you." He nodded once, dark eyes shining. "Then it is ours, together." As the river rushed by, as the canyon walls glowed gold in the afternoon sun, Emma understood the depth of what she had gained. Not just survival, Not just warmth or shelter, but a place where she belonged. A home carved from trust, love, and the enduring promise of the man who had saved her. And for the first time, she felt the truth of Taza's words, spoken in the blizzard so long ago. You'll never be cold again. Winter had long since passed, replaced by a spring that painted the canyon walls with green, gold, and the soft blush of wildflowers. The river ran clear, humming its eternal song, carrying away memories of the storm that had once threatened to claim Emma's life. The cabin by the river had grown into a home warm, safe, and full of the quiet rhythm of life. Emma moved with confidence now, tending the hearth, preparing food, and tending to the small garden Taza had coaxed from the rocky soil. Every task reminded her of the journey they had survived together, the snowstorm, the betrayal, the flight, and finally, the reclaiming of life. Taza stood outside, sharpening his knife in the sunlight, his eyes scanning the horizon as always. Yet there was a softness now, a subtle relaxation in his stance when he caught her gaze. He smiled faintly, a private acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them, a promise that extended beyond survival to something far deeper. Emma approached him, her hands still smelling faintly of earth and herbs, and placed her own on his arm. It feels right, doesn't it? She said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of the cabin, the river, and the life they had built together. Taza nodded. It does, he said. This place, these moments, they are ours. Safe, warm, and enduring. For a moment, they stood in silence, listening to the river's song and the whisper of wind through the canyon. Emma's thoughts drifted back to the blizzard, to the night when Taza had found her, frozen and abandoned. She remembered the fear, the cold, and the certainty that she would not live through the storm. And then she remembered his hands, strong and steady, lifting her from the snow, wrapping her in warmth and carrying her to safety. You kept your promise, she said finally, her voice trembling. You said I'd never be cold again. And I haven't been. Not in body, not in spirit. Taza's eyes softened. I promised because I knew it was possible, because you were worth saving, and because I could not leave you to the snow. His voice held a weight of truth, a vulnerability he rarely showed. I will always keep that promise, Emma. She pressed closer to him, the warmth of his body and the fire in her heart mingling. The fear of the past, the betrayal, the abandonment. The snowstorm felt distant now, shadows that could no longer touch her. Here, in this cabin by the river, she was alive, cherished, and whole. The days passed in a rhythm both simple and profound. They fished the river together, walked the trails through the canyon, and spoke little, letting the land and the quiet companionship fill the spaces between them. Yet in that quiet, their bond grew stronger, woven from trust, survival, and the unspoken understanding of two souls who had faced death and chosen life together. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the canyon walls in gold and crimson, Taza led Emma to the riverbank. He knelt and carved their initials into a smooth river stone. This is ours, he said softly. A promise, made in winter, kept in spring. Emma traced the carved letters with her fingers, her heart swelling. It is perfect, she whispered. He rose, taking her hands in his, and for the first time, they faced the world not as fugitives or survivors, but as partners, equals, and protectors of each other's hearts. The promise of warmth, of safety, and of enduring love had been fulfilled. The canyon held them in a quiet embrace, the river flowing endlessly, a reminder that life, like the water, moves forward, carrying away the remnants of fear and leaving only strength, hope, and love. Emma rested her head against Taza's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the steady warmth of his body, the quiet certainty of his promise. For the first time, she felt truly free, and in the soft light of the evening, with the canyon alive around them and the river singing its eternal song. She whispered, almost to herself, "I am never cold again." Taza smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No," he said softly, "you never will be." And together they watched the sun set over the river, the promise kept, the past behind them, and the future unfolding, warm and endless before them.